Hey there everybody, my name is Kat Bowser. I'm your resident fantasy therapist and welcome back to my channel. Those of you here for the first time, welcome. My name is Kat Bowser. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm also a writer working on my first novel, or actually my first two novels, one for a series, one for a standalone. And on my channel I like to talk about what I consider to be the heart of writing, and that is the characters. And the heart of the characters is their psychology. So that's the angle I like to take pretty much everything I talk about on my channel. So this video is late. I have been using actually my husband's webcam from his school computer to do my videos, and it's not being reliable. So this is my first test with our iPhone camera, so we'll see how it goes. So for those of you that have been chiming in all of last month was Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I was taking that month to talk about mental diagnoses and how they are not always written correctly. So this one was supposed to be done on Sunday, but like I said, things happened, so that didn't happen. So I'm trying to catch up with that. So today I want to talk about writing schizophrenia. So I think schizophrenia is probably the most quote-unquote popular diagnosis because it shows up the most in videos, it shows up the most in movies, TV shows, that kind of thing. And most of the time it's not done very well. So kind of like I've done with all my other videos, I want to kind of touch on the history of it a little bit, give you guys kind of an idea of what it looks like, and then what I think needs to be corrected if we're writing schizophrenia. So first off, schizophrenia, kind of like any mental illness, has been around for freaking ever. I believe the earliest accounts we have of it is in 1550 BC, where people would write about folks seeing things, hearing things, and all the other symptoms that we now associate with schizophrenia. It didn't really get much of more of a investigation until like the 19th century, when it was first essentially separated from other mental disorders, and it was called essentially premature dementia is what they called it. And one of the reasons they called it that is because it was thought to be an illness that would not get better, or it would only get better in small doses, and we found naturally that's not necessarily true. Unfortunately, people with this disorder were subjected to some very horrific quote-unquote treatments in asylums and things like that. And it wasn't until recently, with the introduction of antipsychotics and things like that, that we really started to try to investigate and understand it. So first and foremost, what is schizophrenia? Schizophrenia is a diagnosis, and it actually means split mind. And that is actually used to refer as to the split of the mind from reality, and not necessarily a split of personality. For a while, people were, at least within the layman's, people would get confused between this and dissociative identity disorder, which I will cover at a later date, because that one requires a lot of research. But split mind, so a mind that is split from reality, that is essentially what schizophrenia is. And actually now we are generally referring to schizophrenia, instead of separate diagnoses like there used to be paranoid schizophrenia, disorganized schizophrenia, things like that, we are now referring to it as a schizophrenia spectrum, because schizophrenia can present with different traits and symptoms in different people. So we decided to kind of throw it on a spectrum because it makes more sense. So basically, schizophrenia has positive and negative symptoms, and those should not be used to mean, oh well, this is a good thing, this is a bad thing. Positive means something is added to the person's experience that most people do not have. Negative means something is taken away that most people do have. So positive symptoms: delusions, hallucinations. Negative symptoms: lack of emoting, lack of ability to express themselves verbally, physically, lack of ability to tend to what we call activities of daily living, bathing, eating, that kind of thing. So let me touch on the delusions and hallucinations real quick, because this is really what is usually built on when we're have a movie, book, story that has schizophrenia in it. Delusions are beliefs that are not based in reality. So, for instance, someone who believes that, let's say, aliens are talking to them through music that is played on a pre-recorded CD. Let's say that. That would be a delusion. Now, the tricky thing with delusions is that they range in intensity. So, you may have someone that has a delusion that could technically be possible. So, for example, someone who has a delusion about that they are being tracked by the FBI, for instance. Now, if they have someone who has a significant history of criminal activity and maybe international problems, things like that, that could technically be true. But in most cases, it's unlikely. Then we have hallucinations. Hallucinations are essentially when someone sees, hears, smells, tastes, or touches or feels sensations that are not otherwise there. And hallucinations, the important thing to remember here is hallucinations, you're not getting any input from your sensory organs, your eyes, your ears. It's all in here. So the most common is auditory hallucinations, which is where people hear things. It could be music, it could be someone yelling, and we make a distinction as to whether they are persecutory or not. Persecutory meaning a voice that is very downgrading and telling them to hurt themselves, hurt somebody else, telling them that they're no good, that kind of thing. There's also visual hallucinations. These also range. They can be shadows, they can be very distinct figures. Sometimes they are members of the victim, of the person's family. Let's see. The most popular one that I have seen is it's usually small figures like shadows, or like I had a patient who frequently saw a little girl just walking around, things like that. So again, it ranges significantly. A lot of times people will see demons or monsters or things like that. Then let's see, we go on to the next most common one. It's kind of a tie between olfactory, which is smell, and taste being the next most common in my experience. Something important to note though is if someone is smelling something, one of the things we do first is get them a medical workup to make sure that it's not something physical, because tumors can actually cause that sensation. So we want to clear that first. Most of the time it's not a pleasant smell, unfortunately. I think I worked in a mental hospital for 8 years, and I think I had one person who said they smelled roses. Everybody else, it was things like burning rubber and things like that, just very unpleasant. Taste, kind of the same thing. It's usually not pleasant. It's usually some kind of, like I've heard people say, very acidic tastes. A lot of times they can't identify the specific taste. Like it's not like I taste lemon or anything like that. It's more I just taste something, and they can usually say, it's acidic, it's bitter, it's sweet, things like that, but they can't necessarily identify precisely what it is. And the last one I leave for last because I've only had, I think, 2 patients that I recall that have had what we call tactile hallucinations, which are feeling like something is on you. It's a touch hallucination. Unfortunately, though, this one I think probably causes people the most distress. One particular individual I worked with always had a sensation that there were bugs crawling all over him. And so he would shower consistently just to get rid of this feeling, and then obviously it would come back because, like I said, it's not from your sensory organs, it's from your mind. So that one is probably the most distressing one that I've seen among people, but it's also one I don't see very often at all. So there's that. Let's see, and then we move on to what we call the negative symptoms, which are like I said, things that normal people have that people with schizophrenia do not have. And that is, like, for example, a lot of people with schizophrenia lose their ability, what we call affect, which is essentially when your facial expression matches your emotion. A lot of people with schizophrenia have this very flat affect, so you can't really tell their emotions from their face. There isn't a lot of emotion in their voice. They're almost kind of robotic. Not entirely robotic, but that kind of very stoic, unemotional kind of thing. The other thing is disorganized speech and thought patterns. So there's two examples of this. There's disorganized speech, and then there's word salad. Disorganized speech is where the person is talking and their sentences technically make sense, but they don't really go together. So like someone will be talking about going to, let's say they went out to eat with their grandmother, and then suddenly they'll switch to something entirely unrelated. I'm trying to think of a good example. So this guy would be talking about, I went out to the street for a walk and I could tell by your aura that you'd been eating Oreos or something like that. You see, technically the sentences make sense, but they don't go together. Then you have word salad. Word salad is exactly what it sounds like. It's words that are just meshed together. They don't make any sense. So like you would say like the dog, pillow, sword, carpet, that kind of thing, and people would talk like that, and that's called a word salad. And it's because of misfirings up here. So those are other symptoms. So when I talk about schizophrenia, what is the thing that people get wrong when they write schizophrenia? Most of the time, these people are not dangerous. In fact, they are much more likely to hurt themselves than they are to hurt you. I think a lot of times movies, they unfortunately use the very rare case of like someone becoming extremely paranoid and attacking someone, and I'm not going to pretend that never happens, but it's very rare. It doesn't happen very often. Less than 1% of the population of the United States has schizophrenia, and it's definitely what we called a environmentally triggered genetic disorder. When I was in training, that's what they called it, because it has a very strong genetic factor. They've done lots of twin studies, and most of the time, if you have an identical twin that has it, you are, I want to say it's like 75% likely to have it, but don't quote me on that number because it changes every time they do more research. But what we call an environmental trigger means that you can have two people that have the gene for it, but it takes a specific environmental trigger to set it off. So let's say, for example, it's some form of trauma, just for instance. And let's say that one twin is exposed to trauma at like 17, 18, and so they develop schizophrenia. The other twin does not, and so he never develops schizophrenia. So he essentially has the switch for it, but it's never been flipped, if that makes sense. There are specific ages we have noticed where it kind of chimes in more often. For men, it's like late teens to like early 20s. Women, it's late 20s to early 30s. And then sometimes there's a late onset, which is, I believe, 55 to 60 for women. And I think it's like 55 to 65 for men, somewhere around that angle. And we think part of it, has to do with the hormonal change, because there's a big shift in hormones, like when you go through, like for women, when you go through menopause, or when you enter adulthood from your teenage years, that kind of thing. So there's still a lot we don't know about it. So when I see people write this, kind of like with everything, they jump to the sensationalized version. They jump to people being extremely paranoid and trying to hurt other people to protect themselves, that kind of thing. And the thing is once schizophrenia is controlled, and it can be controlled, these people can live completely normal lives. Sometimes you'll have people come in that get a med adjustment because after a couple years, your body chemistry changes, and so you have to switch your meds sometimes. I had a woman come in that was a psychiatrist. And all she came in, she said, I know that that my meds are not working as well anymore. I need to get them adjusted. And once she left, she went back to work because she was able to. Now, does it vary from person to person? Yes. We have something in psychology we call a baseline, which is basically your behavior before any alterations, be it therapy, medicine, whatever. And when people have what we call a psychotic break, where they have their first onset of these symptoms, you get it under control and you never quite get them back to baseline. Get them pretty close, but you never quite get them where they were before. And that's one reason that we actually stress people to talk to the doctors and stay on their medications, because the more psychotic breaks you have, the further from your baseline you move. We haven't quite figured out how to fix that yet. It may be it's something we can't fix, but we don't know yet. But that's why a lot of times people will very stress with people, you know, it's very important you take your medication, because it doesn't work like Tylenol or Advil. You have to take it all the time for it to work. Now, can people with schizophrenia live without medication? In some cases. I stress the word some cases because in my experience it is very, very rare for someone to be able to do that, because they have to be able to kind of teach themselves how to tell reality from their hallucinations and their delusions, and it can be very hard. But I don't want to say it's impossible, because it's not impossible, it's just very rare. So what I want to see more when people write this disorder, I want to see more than just the positive symptoms, because that's usually what gets the focus. I want to see more of people talking about the negative symptoms, because those really impact a person's life as well. In some cases, a person can become catatonic, which is where they basically shut down. They don't move, they don't talk, they don't eat. In some cases, we will use electroconvulsive therapy to help with that, if nothing else has worked, because it does seem to have a record for bringing people out of that. But again, we don't know exactly why. We think it kind of works as a reset button, but we're not entirely sure. But I want to see more of, if you're going to have someone who has uncontrolled schizophrenia, don't just focus on the positive symptoms. And also, just their illness does not eliminate their personality. So many times I see people writing people with schizophrenia, and they're just focusing on them hearing things, seeing things, being paranoid. And while that's true, they also have personalities. They like to do artwork. They like to listen to music. They like to talk to people. They like to watch their favorite movies. They still do those things. Depending on how intense their symptoms are, they may invade and interrupt their routine, but they still have a personality. And I think that's really what I think is missing when people write these, is just the diagnosis. It's not their personality. And I really think that's important, because these people are still individuals. They're still people, goals and dreams, and in many cases they can still achieve those goals and dreams. So I think it's really important to bring that more to the forefront. And like I said, you can live a perfectly normal life with schizophrenia. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be mindful of your symptoms, but you can do it. And I really think that's important, because I think sometimes, especially in movies, for drama's sake, they present it as this horrific thing that is going to completely wreck your life. And while it's definitely not an easy diagnosis to cope with, it is one that can be dealt with, and people can, like I said, live normal lives with it. So I want to see more of that when people write this disorder. So that is just, like I said with my other videos, this is a bare bones on schizophrenia. I'm actually going to attach 2 videos in the description for you guys, and they actually are interviews with people who have schizophrenia, demonstrating some of these symptoms that I think are hard for people to grasp, like the disorganized thought, the word salad, that kind of thing. So you guys can kind of get an idea. And as I said with all my other videos, if you're going to write this, I highly recommend do your own research. I highly recommend talk to someone that works with people that have schizophrenia, and I highly recommend, if you can, talk to someone that has it, because I think that's the only way you're really going to stay true to what really goes on with people that have this disorder. Because like I said, they're real people. They have dreams, they have hopes, they have their own quirks, and I want to see more of that. So I think we can work on that. So thank you guys for chiming in for my video. I will try to make up my videos that I have missed. Like I said, I'm kind of getting used to a new camera, so we'll see how it works. Here's hoping it works. And as always, if you guys have any comments or suggestions, feel free to leave them below. I will get to them as soon as I can. And if you want to know whenever I upload, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss it. I try to upload every Friday, every Sunday. Like I said, this past Sunday I wasn't able to, but I'm going to try to stick to that. And until next time, I hope you guys have a good one.